Have you ever stopped to observe how you spend your days? How you wake up, follow routines, fulfill obligations, fall asleep, and start it all over again? And in some quiet moment, when the mind finally settles, that uncomfortable feeling arises, that whisper that asks, is this it? Is this really what I wanted for my life? Because there is a truth that few have the courage to admit, but which Alan Watts deeply understood throughout his teachings. Most people are not living the life they desire, they are running from it, escaping from it, building walls around their own dreams and calling it responsibility, realism, maturity. But what is really happening is something much deeper and more frightening. We are running from the life we always wanted to live because at some point we learned to be afraid of it. Think about that for a moment. When you were a child, you had immense dreams, clear visions of what you wanted to be, what you wanted to experience. There was no inner voice telling you it was impossible, that it wasn't practical, that you should choose something safer. You simply knew what you wanted. And then something happened. The world began to speak louder than your heart. The expectations of others became more important than your own aspirations. And slowly, almost without realizing it, you began to run. Not towards your dreams, but away from them. Because dreaming hurts. Because wanting something deeply and not achieving it is painful. So it's easier to pretend you never wanted that. It's simpler to build a life that seems acceptable in the eyes of others than to risk everything for what your heart truly longs for. Alan Watts spoke about this with a clarity that still resonates today. He said we spend our lives postponing, always preparing to live, but never really living. We study to get a job. We work to have security. We accumulate to have comfort. And then, when we should finally be ready to live, we realize that life has already passed us by. That we spent decades preparing for something that never arrived because we were too busy preparing. It's like learning to swim without ever getting into the water, like studying music without ever playing an instrument. You may know everything about the theory, but you have never experienced the essence of it. And the life you always wanted to live is there, waiting, but you keep running in the opposite direction, convinced that you are being sensible, practical, adult. But understand, it's not that you have completely given up. It's something more subtle, more cruel. You put your true life in a box and saved it for later, for when there is more money, for when the children grow up, for when you retire, for when the circumstances are perfect. But circumstances are never perfect. And that later you are so eagerly waiting for is a comfortable illusion that allows you to keep running without admitting that you are escaping. Because admitting that you are running from the life you always wanted to live would mean having to do something about it. It would mean having to stop, turn around, and walk towards what really matters. And that, my friend, requires a courage that few are willing to muster. Alan Watts understood that this escape is not just about wrong career choices or unsatisfying relationships. It's about something much more fundamental. It's about having forgotten who you really are, because before you learned to run, before you built all those defenses and justifications, you knew there was a direct connection between what you felt and what you did, between what you desired and what you sought. But then you were taught to distrust yourself. You were taught that your desires were immature, that your dreams were unrealistic, that you needed to be shaped, adjusted, corrected. And in the process of trying to fit into what others expected, you lost touch with what really mattered to you, and now you live a life that feels like someone else's. A life that you might even describe as good, as stable, but that deep down, in moments of absolute silence, you know is not yours. And here lies the cruel paradox that Watts explored so much. The more you run from the life you always wanted to live, the more anxious you become, more restless, more dissatisfied. Because you can fool the whole world, you can build a perfect facade of success and fulfillment, but you cannot fool that deep part of yourself that knows the truth, that knows you are betraying your own dreams every day, that you are choosing security over fullness, comfort over meaning. And that part of you, that inner voice you try so hard to silence, it doesn't give up. It keeps whispering, sometimes shouting, reminding you that you are running from the only life that is truly worth living, your own. If this video is touching something in you, if these words are making sense, leave your like so that more people can find this message. Subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of awakening. And in the comments, tell us which city you are watching from and if you have realized what you are running from. Let's create a community of people willing to stop fleeing and start living. But why do we do this? Why do we deliberately choose to distance ourselves from what we desire most? Alan Watts had a fascinating answer to that. He said, "We have been conditioned to see life as a problem to be solved, not as an experience to be lived. From a young age, we are taught that there is a right way to live, an approved path, a formula for success. And this formula rarely has anything to do with who we really are or what we want. It has to do with what is expected, with what is safe, with what can be measured and compared. So you study the right subjects, choose the approved profession, seek the acceptable relationship, buy the house in the right neighborhood, and with each step along this path, you drift further away from yourself. Because this path was not charted by you, it was laid out long before you were born by people who were also running from their own lives. And here is something that needs to be said with complete clarity. When you live someone else's life, when you follow the script that was written for you instead of writing your own, you are not really living, you are playing a role. And you may even become very good at it. You may even convince everyone, including yourself, that this is really your life. But deep down, you know when you are in a meeting discussing something that doesn't matter to you. You know when you are doing something just because it is expected, not because it resonates with who you are. You know on Sunday nights, when the anxiety of the approaching week tightens your chest, that something is deeply wrong. Not wrong in the sense of broken, but wrong in the sense of false, misaligned with your essence. Alan Watts used to use the metaphor of dance to explain this. He said we treat life as if it were a journey with a final destination, when in fact it is a dance, something we do for the pleasure of doing, not to get somewhere. But we run through life trying to reach the next milestone, the next achievement, the next level, and in the process, we completely lose the present moment. We lose the dance. You are running from the life you always wanted to live because you are too busy trying to reach an imaginary future where you will finally be allowed to live. But that future is a mirage. It recedes at the same speed you run towards it. Because the life you always wanted to live is not in the future. It is here now, in this moment, waiting for you to stop running and simply step into it. But this requires something radical. It requires you to question everything, all the premises upon which you built your life, all the beliefs about what is possible, what is appropriate, what is sensible, because many of those beliefs are not yours. They are echoes of the voices of your parents, teachers, society, culture. And those voices may have had good intentions, but they do not know you. They do not know what makes your heart race, what gives meaning to your days, what you would do even if no one ever knew or applauded. Only you know that. Or rather, only you could know that if you stopped long enough to listen. But you are too busy running, too busy maintaining this life you built, even if it is slowly crushing who you really are. And there is a particular fear that keeps many of us running, a fear that Alan Watts accurately identified. It is the fear of discovering that if you truly pursued the life you always wanted to live, you might fail. You might not be good enough, sufficient. You might discover that the dream you have cherished so dearly in your heart all these years is, in fact, unattainable. And that is terrifying because as long as you don't try, the dream remains intact, perfectly preserved in your imagination. But the moment you actually go after it, you risk destroying it. And then, what would be left? So many choose to never try. They choose to run in circles, always busy, always with valid excuses about why now is not the right time. And the years pass, and the dream fades, and you become accustomed to that dull pain of a life not lived. But there is another way, and Watts knew it well. It is the way of stopping the run, of turning around, of looking directly at what you have been avoiding, and asking yourself with brutal honesty, why am I running away? What do I really fear? And often the answer is not failure, it is success. Because if you truly lived the life you always wanted, if you really allowed yourself to be who you are, a lot would have to change. Relationships based on your false version would have to be renegotiated or ended. Jobs that suck your soul would have to be abandoned. Comforts that you fought to obtain would have to be sacrificed. And that requires courage. Not the courage of a heroic moment, but the quiet and persistent courage to choose, day after day, authenticity over acceptance, meaning over security. You are running from the life you always wanted to live, but you don't have to keep running. At any moment, you can stop, you can breathe, you can look around and ask, what do I really want? Not what my parents want, not what society expects, not what looks impressive on paper. What do I, in my deepest self, really want to experience before I die? And when you ask that question seriously, when you truly listen to the answer, something inside you will begin to change. Because you cannot unknow what you come to know. You cannot pretend you didn't hear the truth once it has been spoken. And then the real journey begins. Not the journey of running, but the journey of returning, of coming home, to yourself, to the life that has always been waiting for you to have the courage to live it. Block 3, 1,000 words. Alan Watts had a particular way of describing this return. He said it is not about adding something to your life, but about removing layers. Layers of conditioning, of expectations, of false personas that you built to survive in a world that does not value authenticity. You are running from the life you always wanted to live because you are carrying all these layers and they are heavy. They make it impossible to move freely, impossible to dance, impossible to simply be. And the great irony is that you put them on thinking they would protect you, when in fact they became your prison. You built walls so high around yourself that now you can no longer see the sky. You can no longer remember what it feels like to feel the wind on your face, what it is to move without fear, what it is to live without calculating every step. But the good news, the news that Watts always emphasized, is that you can start removing those layers now. You don't have to wait until you have all the answers, until you have a perfect plan, until the circumstances are ideal. You can start small. You can do one thing today, just one thing, that is true for you, even if no one else understands. You can say no to something you have always accepted out of obligation. You can say yes to something your heart desires but your mind fears. You can spend an hour doing something for the sheer pleasure of doing it, without a goal, without productivity, without justification. And in that hour, you will remember. You will remember what it is to be truly alive, not just existing, but living fully, without running, without fleeing, simply present in the moment. And here is something crucial that needs to be understood about stopping the run from the life you always wanted to live. It does not mean abandoning responsibilities or becoming irresponsible. It means stopping using responsibilities as an excuse not to live. Because you can care for the people you love, you can fulfill your obligations, you can be reliable and present, and still live authentically. In fact, when you stop betraying yourself, when you stop running from your own life, you become more present for others, not less. Because you are no longer carrying that silent resentment, that envy of those who dare to live fully, that bitterness of a wasted life. You are whole, and from a place of integrity, you have much more to offer than you ever did from a place of fragmentation and fear. Alan Watts also reminded us of something fundamental. We live as if we have infinite time. We plan our true life for some day in the distant future, as if death were just an abstraction that happens to other people. But you do not have infinite time. No one does. And every day you spend running from the life you always wanted to live is a day you will never get back. I am not saying this to create panic, but to bring clarity. To make you realize that postponing your real life is not a neutral option. It is a choice. You are choosing every day to keep running or to stop and live. And that choice has real consequences. The consequence of running is reaching the end of life full of regrets, saying, I wish I had, I could have, I should have. The consequence of stopping and living is, well, it is living. It is experiencing the fullness, the meaning, the depth that only comes when you are truly present in your own existence. And perhaps the most important question you can ask yourself now is, what exactly am I running from? Because the answer may surprise you. You may think you are running from failure, but perhaps you are running from the responsibility to try. You may think you are being practical, but perhaps you are just being cowardly. You may think you are protecting yourself, but perhaps you are slowly mutilating yourself. These are hard truths, and Alan Watts was never afraid of hard truths. He understood that awakening is not always comfortable, that seeing yourself clearly can be painful. But it is a necessary pain, the pain of growth, of transformation, of the birth of an authentic life. And when you finally stop running, when you finally turn around and start walking toward the life you always wanted to live, you will discover something wonderful. You will discover that you are not alone, that there are others who have also stopped running, who have also chosen authenticity over approval. And they will recognize you immediately, not because you are wearing the right clothes or saying the right words, but because there is something unmistakable about someone who is truly living, a presence, a lightness, a joy that does not depend on external circumstances. And they will be your people, your tribe, those with whom you can finally take off the mask and simply be. You are running from the life you always wanted to live, but that can end now, in this moment, with a simple yet profound decision to stop, to breathe, To look around and ask, what is real here? What is true? What really matters? And then, with all the courage you can muster, take a step toward that. Not a giant step, just one step, and then another, and another. And before you know it, you will no longer be running. You will be living. Finally, truly, fully living the life that has always been waiting for you. The life you were born to live. The life that is completely, authentically, undeniably yours. If this message resonated with you, if something here touched that part of you that knows it is time to stop running, leave your like, subscribe to the channel for more content that challenges you to live fully. And in the comments, tell me which city you are watching us from, and what the first step you will take today to stop running and start living is. Your true life is waiting, and it always has been.